Welcome to the Burns Perspective. I'm your host, Taylor Burns. Join me as we talk to athletes who are striving to be the best that they can be, coaches who aim to be the coach that they needed when they were younger, and join us as we entertain various topics on holistic athletic development. I am really excited about today's guest, Erik Sabrowski, pitcher for the Cleveland Guardians. I have had the absolute privilege of knowing and coaching Erik since he was 13 years old. His story is truly remarkable. He's one of just 5 Edmontonians to make the big leagues. He has shown pretty incredible resilience and perseverance in his journey to get to where he's at, with 2 Tommy John surgeries. Wasn't drafted out of high school, transferred junior colleges, and then was drafted as a sophomore out of Cloud County Community College. Pitched for, immediately had to have Tommy John after getting drafted. Pitched for a season in A-ball, had a really strong showing. And then COVID hit, was kind of stuck up here in Edmonton. And then unfortunately needed to undergo the second Tommy John surgery. Just can't say enough good things about, how he's been able to battle through the adversity. And it was pretty incredible to watch him reap the rewards of all his hard work and perseverance this fall, pitching really, really well down the stretch and pitching really, really well in the playoffs for Cleveland. We get into some specifics of, pitch design and his feels and training and all that good stuff. And really the aim of this conversation was to, help any young pitchers, learn how to work on their craft and get the most out of their potential. So I hope you enjoy it. All right, Erik, thanks a lot for taking the time and coming on.
Of course.
Thanks for having me. It's kind of weird because obviously we see each other so much. So doing this in a little bit more of a formal setting is weird, but I think a lot of young pitchers could really benefit. So that's sort of my aim, I guess. Not to go through like your story so much, because I think if people want to find it and hear about it, they can, and I think they certainly should, but just more, I guess, give some insight into some of the lessons, you've kind of learned on your
Definitely.
journey.
Yeah. There's so many lessons that.
Yeah. So I think I actually want to start, more recent and then go backwards. So, and we're going to get into kind of the nitty gritty of like pitching and then training and all of it, I guess, long-term development. I think the first question I kind of have is if someone didn't know you and were to watch you and look up your stuff, a couple things stand out, obviously, with the way you can manipulate the baseball with the fastball and the curveball. My question to you is, obviously, having known you for so long, can you point to what kind of allowed you to do that and when it kind of started to get even better and become like an outlier thing for you?
I think every pitcher is different. We're all like snowflakes. Everyone will be different to some extent. And for me, my, pitching profile is someone with more backspin and more ride on the ball. And with that comes the ability to get out in front of it and front spin it as well with the curveball. I don't know if everyone has the ability to do that. Like some guys throw sinkers. I can't throw a sinker at all. Some guys throw a cut fastball. That's not me either. It's something that I always have been able to do, but I didn't know it until I was in professional baseball.
Right.
Like when I was in college, there was one outing where I struck out a bunch of guys and my head coach was friends with their head coach. And he said it felt like the ball was rising.
Right.
And in 2018, we didn't really know that meant I had lots of, induced vertical break on my fastball. I would say once I got into professional baseball with the Padres and was throwing with TrackMan units and Rapsodos more often, when they said, hey, this is what you're really good at. And for me, at that point, it was then trying to figure out the feeling that allowed me to replicate the backspin and the hand behind the ball more often than not.
Right. And I mean, when I think about even you in like later high school, like, your velocity when grade 11, grade 12 wasn't great.
I was lucky to hit 80.
But I don't know. The old term was like he has a heavy ball, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think about that, and you always could kind of spin the curveball. So would you say like, it was like you kind of hit on once you got into pro ball, and then it was like, oh, this is what I can do. So then, what do you think in the last couple years obviously was identified? What do you think has allowed you to like leverage those strengths and kind of build on them even more? Or what are your keys, I guess?
Well, there's the game plan goals of trying to throw, when I throw a fastball, trying to throw it up in the zone.
Right.
That's where it'll play with more ride. But then there's also the mechanical cues of, for me, I'm a more, I guess, linear pitcher.
Right.
Like I need to have my energy go through the plate. I'm not someone who will benefit from more of a rotational approach, like you see with guys who throw sinkers and stuff. Like I need to be focusing through the plate, and almost at release, I think about pulling down.
Right. Okay.
Pulling down the baseball to make sure my hand is behind it all the way. And that starts from, my load, my leg lift, getting a little bit of a hitch, a little bit of a tilt.
Right.
To where then when I come through, I can use that tilt to leverage the baseball. And then with the front arm, it's pulling down versus out or things like that. And those two things together probably allow me to get that ride that we talk about.
For sure. And then would you say, I guess, I mean, seeing the trajectory of your career through the minors and everything, I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, but in Fort Wayne in the high A year, you threw probably more curveballs, and as time has gone on, it's been less curveballs. And obviously a big change for you this year was the emergence of the slider. Is that correct?
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think that has to do with the hitters being a little better at each level? Scouting report, both? And then, what has allowed, I know you kind of jokingly, we talk about it all the time where like, you joke that the slider is your project. It's always a little bit different, but it's turned into a really, really good pitch for you. The slider is it's a different feel. Like I would say the fastball, the curveball are almost like polar opposites. So, So is there certain cues you have with the slider, because it's obviously different in terms of like how you want to manipulate it, and what has allowed you to kind of build that pitch?
Well, I think you've seen the sliders taking off in baseball in the last, people always threw sliders, but they're kind of realizing the importance and how well the slider actually plays in all counts, all handedness, everything. And like Cleveland thinks the slider is the most important pitch in baseball, or the best performing pitch in all, in all occurrences. I think for me, the slider, you call it the project. I'm always working on it. The biggest cue that I felt is, and again, this won't work for everyone, this comes from how I throw a ball, is almost getting my hand underneath and around the baseball. Like you think of a typical door handle, you're almost over top of it and you twist it. For me, it's almost like starting halfway underneath it and then twisting it. And I'm obviously not throwing the ball with, the back of my hand facing the plate. But that's the feel and the cue I need to have for it to be successful.
I think that's a great point, and I think any pitcher, young or even more advanced pitchers, it's important to understand feel versus real. And that's a term that gets thrown around all the time, but it's, you have to find what works for you. And then there's times you got to look at video and look at the metrics and everything, but understand what feel you have to create the output you want. Right. So I think that's huge for anyone listening, is to understand, like, you have to know and you have to figure out what works for you, right, to create whatever you want to create.
Right. And to go off that point, like, I think if a random person looked at the metrics on my slider, they would say, oh, that's not a great slider at all, but it's what works for me. And it fits right in the middle of my two other pitches. And it's not a very, low vert or high cut pitch, but based on the context of the other two pitches, is right where, I kind of want it to be.
For sure. I think that's the most, in my opinion, it kind of drives me nuts sometimes with pitch design, where, I think first and foremost, it's not just individual pitches in the vacuum. You have to look at how they interact with each other. And then, you can go too far down the rabbit hole with like how pitches look just purely with metrics, but the hitter is going to ultimately hitter is going to tell you if it's good or not. Right. And you can have a pitch that's like, there's just a lot more gray area and nuance. And I think some people want to believe when it comes to this stuff. Right. And I think you hit the nail on the head there for sure.
Yeah. I'd probably got in trouble in the last few years of like trying to chase a more metrically pleasing pitch.
Right.
And the ability was there to throw that one, but the way I had to manipulate the ball in my body,
Right.
it would throw off my feels for another pitch or two. So if I would throw a slider, it would almost take me, I'd have a waste pitch after that because I would just be out of sync from trying so hard to, get that
moving how you want.
Exactly.
Yeah, or how you think you want.
Yeah, and like you said, it's all context. It's all based off of your other pitches.
And then, it gets overlooked too, like maybe a little bit of a worse pitch, but something you can command in the 4 quadrants is going to be way better than a better moving pitch that, you can't command it with precision, right?
You can throw a demon sweeper, but if that's always bouncing in the other batter's box, who cares how much it moves? It's a useless pitch at that point.
For sure. I feel like we're just going to kind of jump all over, but I think that's the way it should be. We talked about the slider being a project, and we had a conversation. I can't remember. I think it was this week, maybe about, I think we were texting actually about the value of just feeling like you're always getting a little better. I think a lot of athletes, like we don't want to, completely go back to the drawing board all the time, no matter who you are. Like, know who you are and then build on your strengths and get a little better. But I think sometimes anybody can get a little stagnant. Like, okay, I've got it now. So talk a little bit about how, even in season, the value of just feeling like you're improving or like going out and like working on getting a little better.
Well, to stay in the context of the slider, like I have my grip that I use in the game.
Right.
But during, throwing program before the game, I'll throw it at different distances with different grips, just trying to overemphasize sweep or trying to, if there's one day where it's probably moving more than I want it to, trying to get more of a cutter feel, just things like that. Always not trying to change the pitch itself come game time, but trying to mess with different feels and different cues because you don't really know what's out there if you don't try it.
Right. And then that's probably just building awareness and the ability of you to control your body and what the baseball does, right? Like continuing to mess around is not the right term, but like kind of mess around so that you can, I guess, and you might stumble on something too, right? Like 2-3 years ago, we didn't have a slider.
Not at all.
So like it started with kind of that process.
Yeah. Of just trying different grips and throwing it and seeing which one felt good.
Right.
And then trying to translate to the mound. And if it worked, awesome. If it didn't, back to the drawing board.
Right.
There's
for sure.
Plenty of different ways to hold what people call a slider.
A big question I want to ask you, because we've talked about it obviously, but I've heard you talk about it with a bunch of people. When you, for the listeners that don't know, Erik started the season in AAA, bit of a numbers game, and went back to AA for a month.
Yeah.
And I remember the conversation we had, a day or two after it happened, and you said, I'm going to go down and pitch angry. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think you bottled that up and were able to kind of keep it correct the rest of the year.
Yeah.
So my question specifically, I guess, is how do you balance pitching angry but staying calm? Because something that I battle with talking with my athletes about is we talk about finding their number, right? So having the right amount of intensity. But even if you're maybe like a 5 or a 6, it doesn't mean you're not intense. It's you still need to be calm, if that makes sense. So can you talk, especially because I think once you got up in the big leagues, it was probably a battle to like probably the challenge was controlling your breathing and not getting too amped up, especially early. So
a few times I felt like I was too calm, almost like I was over exaggerating the, being in the big leagues, bigger stadiums, bigger stage. I assumed that, the heart rate and the mind would be going much quicker. And I was almost over exaggerating the calmness. Right. And there was a few times I'd thrown a couple pitches and I was like, no, you need to actually turn it back on kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, pitched angry in AA. I wasn't happy with the decision to go back down, but it was out of my control.
Right.
And it was the idea that I wanted to show whoever made the decision that they might've made the wrong one.
Right.
And the angry idea could have probably went the wrong way in trying to do too much on the mound. But it was just the idea of trying to be the best version of myself every time I took the ball, and the anger of getting sent down kind of helped me channel that to performance.
Right. Okay. Do you have any, I guess like in game, let's say you're a little too calm or a little too intense. Do you have any things you use like quickly in the moment to sort of like level yourself out?
If I find the game speeding up on me, it's a little tougher with the pitch clock now. You don't have much time, but there's plenty of time in those 18 seconds to step off and take a deep breath.
Right.
And you can also use the pitch clock. Like you get 2 disengagements. There's a couple times too where, I might have forgotten to take the breath and I realize as I'm getting the signs, like, oh, I'm still, the mind's still flying, and where I was able in that moment to step off. And that's when I would, recalibrate and refocus at the task at hand.
Right. I think that's really valuable for obviously I don't think high school still has the pitch clock yet, but for any pros or college guys out there listening, because when I remember all the way from a young age being told like, hey, you're in charge of the game. You can control the pace. The hitter has to wait for you. And so obviously with the pitch clock that has changed, but I think it's really important. Erik just touched on like, there's still some ways to make sure that you're in control and you need to feel like you're in control. I mean, you should never throw a pitch that you're not ready to, right? So you need to make sure that you have things in place, right?
Yeah. And, some programs may not like this, but you can waste a disengagement sometimes. Like
there's ways to get around it a little bit.
Yeah. You can, take your signs, let it run all the way down to 1, step off, and then now you have 36 seconds to
reset,
to regroup versus trying to fly through it. And, I have a mental checklist of things that I need to do to be ready. And if I feel like I haven't probably completed all of that, I'm doing myself a disservice by trying to throw a pitch because I'm probably not going to be fully convicted in it. And then that's when bad things happen.
Right. For sure. Okay. Again, kind of jumping all over the place. I guess my next question, and I think this will allow us to get into a little bit of like in-season training, because I think that I think around here, we have really changed things with, and I think the industry as a whole has changed a lot, even since you got into the minors with how guys lift in season.
Right.
And lifting heavy and all that stuff. Right. It's not, you don't have to be afraid of it. You just have to do it smart. You're looking ahead to next year with your routines on game day throughout the week. Is there anything you've looked at that you might adjust or tweak, or some things that you did maybe not as consistently that you're like, okay, I'm gonna make that more consistent part of my routine?
Yeah, when I was going through my own reflection of the season, that one thing stood out for me, and it was not once during the year did I say, I wish I had not lifted today.
Right.
And more often than not, I actually was like, man, my velo is up. I'm kind of happy I lifted today.
Right.
And there's a little bit of a correlation there. And whether that's maybe not prepping well enough on non-lift days or whatever, but it showed me that I can lift heavy, at 10, 11 a.m. and still be able to perform at 7.
Right. And not just perform. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's a couple times your velo was highest on days you lifted, especially I think the first time you were back up to 95 in the big leagues, was it not like you got after, am I wrong? You got after
no, you're right.
lower body day that month, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. So listeners, kids and college athletes, like, don't be afraid of the weight room, but it's important to know the best in-season training strategy is building up a foundation in the off season.
Absolutely.
You have to build up the work capacity so that like Erik's not like, he's working hard, but it's not something that he's not used to. It's actually probably like relatively like a 6 or 7. Like you're probably not sore the next day.
Right.
You're putting in work, but your body's used to it. Right. So it's important. And it's December right now. So if anyone's listening to this, put in the work now so that you can, lift on game day. If you identify that it is what's best for you, you need to make sure that you're able to.
Yeah. It's just the nature of during a long season, you're going to lose mobility. You're going to lose that base of strength. And if you're not going to build it up in the off season, if you try and build it up during the season, that's going to hurt your performance.
For sure. And your velocity continue to climb all the way through the summer, right? And I think that's a big part of it.
Right.
Yeah. Kind of jumping around again, I guess I came across something that I hadn't heard until recently. I like it. It's phrased a certain way. And obviously you're the story of resilience with the 2 Tommy Johns and the long road and everything. So the words were the hard that you do and the hard that you've done prepares you for the hard to come.
Right.
So, obviously the two Tommy Johns, and especially the second one, and even the long road in the minors and COVID and the whole deal. What can you point to anything earlier that kind of maybe was a bedrock or a foundation to lean on, when you're going through those times of like, okay, like I got through that, I can get through this?
Yeah. So during the second rehab, it was a little bit of, I put the work in the first one. It didn't work. Oh, well, I owe it to myself to try it again.
Right.
But probably a holistic goal or phrase that I would always tell myself is like, remember your why.
Right.
And why
Where'd
am
you
I
learn that?
You? Exactly. And it'd be like, why am I going into the facility on a Sunday at 7 a.m.?
Right.
Why? Because I want to pitch in the big leagues.
Yes.
Why am I repeating the throwing program? Because my elbow's been a little bit sore. Because I want to go to the big leagues. I'm doing all of that work because of the main goal.
Right.
And that, it didn't always make it immediately easier.
Right.
But it would help me get through, we all have weeks or days where, you just don't feel like doing the work. But as something as simple as that, remembering what the ultimate end goal is, what would help me propel myself through endless shoulder manuals and
tedium
and wrist curls, all the tedious
the
stuff,
monotony and all the boring stuff, so that you could. I mean, let's face it. I mean, even I about as big a believer in you as anybody. But even I don't think in my like wildest dreams did I think you'd go 18 innings and give up one run. But like when you think about it now, like that was the why. It was like have a chance to, get that opportunity and seize it. Yeah,
and it probably made, pitching in tough spots easier because it's like, is this really tough? Like
playing
I'm
with house
fun.
money almost with how much you went through, right?
Yeah, I'm
you to be
pitching
loose.
in the big leagues, in the playoffs or on national TV. It's like, is that really that tough with what I'd gone through?
Yeah.
So
and that's what it's all been for.
Exactly.
Yeah. For right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Man, I feel like I got maybe two more like big ones. I think it's really important because I think probably a lot of our listeners I'm going to guess are going to be probably high school, maybe college athletes.
Mm-hmm.
Your freshman year. Okay. So for those that don't know, Erik goes down. Actually, he was really good at both. He was a better hitter, I would say, in high school. Goes down to a JUCO in Texas. Starts the season. You were playing first base. Was it the first 2 weekends you started every game?
Opening day, first base, like
3-hole or 4-hole? 5-hole, yeah, right? Doesn't go great. I want to say the first weekend you had some hard outs.
Yeah, I was hitting the ball hard.
Yeah,
but in the end, I think it was like 2 for 20.
Right.
Like it wasn't good.
No. So and then like a lot of times in college baseball, someone else gets a chance and now you're behind them. Correct?
Yeah.
And then we won't get into it, but for whatever reason, you ended up pitching 8 innings? That
8 or 10, something like that. Garbage
and actually
innings,
had pretty good numbers though.
Yeah,
correct. Like I can't
pitch
even
when you're
remember
down 10.
Yes, but still, like if you just looked at the box scores or the stat page, you'd kind of go maybe could have thrown a few more innings. But anyway, I digress. So why I'm getting to this is a few weeks ago we were talking about it, and you basically said your roommate or a teammate was a meathead.
Yeah,
and when
roommate.
When you weren't, everyone talks about work while you wait. But I think it was the most pivotal time because you told me when you weren't playing, you just started lifting 7 days a week, correct?
We just started lifting and long tossing. Me and my roommate, he was a red shirt. I was basically a red shirt at this point.
Yeah.
And we had nothing else to do.
Yeah.
Like we decided to dedicate ourselves to trying to throw harder and, lift a little bit more.
But I think that's extremely valuable because there's so many kids out there that, maybe, and I train a lot of hockey players. They're playing on the fourth line or getting healthy scratched. And it's like, well, you should be lifting way more. You're not expending that much energy in the games.
Right.
Go sprint, go do more.
Well, and you can get caught in this cycle of like, maybe I'll play tomorrow. And before you know it, it's been a week and you haven't done anything. When you look back at it, really, you probably could have gotten 2 or 3 lifts in
for sure.
Speed day.
And really that led to the spike in velo a year later, which is what allowed you to get drafted, which is what allowed you to do everything.
Exactly.
That foundation of strength that obviously there was a lot of work put in before that, but I mean, that was a pivotal 2-3 months, I think, that allowed you to throw the baseball 90 miles an hour. Because even at Cisco, you had a bit of a jump, right? You were like 85, 86.
On good days, yeah.
Yeah, right?
Mid
So you weren't-
80s for
Yeah,
sure.
and then that summer with the prospects, you weren't throwing 90.
No.
No.
Mid 80s again.
Right. So again, if anyone's out there, I hope anyone listening, the season coming up, you're going to get to play and it's going to go great. But sometimes life doesn't go how you want. So if you're not playing, work. The answer is always going to be to work.
Yeah. Yeah. You have the option to mope around. And I know that's harsh, or you can work hard, right? Try and, like I said earlier about when I got sent to AA, like try and show people that they made the wrong decision.
Right.
And all you can do is all you can control is what you do.
Right.
You can't control what they think about you. You can change that by working harder and maybe throwing a little bit harder or skating a little bit faster, but that will all come from the work you put in, not what anyone else does.
So that kind of leads me into my next point, I guess. And I'm going to say this as nice as I can. So, everyone who looks at you now, and I just let it go now, but everyone go, oh man, he's pretty naturally gifted. He's a big dude. He's jacked. And
thank you.
Well, I just shake my head though, because I'm like, well, it's been more than a decade of work.
Yeah.
Even if you looked at pictures of you in grade 12, like you did not look how you look now.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I bring this up is, I've told kids all the time that like hard work can outdo genetics. And
right.
You have some good genetics. Tom gave you a good big frame, but you weren't naturally you couldn't just eat anything and have 12% body fat.
No,
you didn't just naturally have a ton of muscle. Right. And I think it's important for kids to understand that and like, why not me? Right. So can you maybe, I know you've probably been asked this a lot, but can you kind of, if you had a message to a 16, 17-year-old that maybe, or a 19-year-old in college, it's not going that well. Like what would your message be to just sort of like, how can you get to where, not even where you want to be, but just maximize their potential and, even have a good college career?
If you put in the work and you put in the right amount of work, it'll come. Like you said, like I went to school as a hitter. Maybe there was pitching potential before then, but I went to school as a hitter and we didn't find my true potential as a pitcher till my sophomore year.
Right.
I threw some good innings in high school and stuff, but it won't happen overnight. And sometimes it'll surprise you when it happens, right? Like there's probably plenty of guys on my team with Cleveland who were one of the best players on their team their whole life, from 8 years old on or whatever. There's not very many of me who, finally reached that potential as a sophomore in college at 20 years old.
Right.
Like if you put in the right work, it will happen eventually.
Right. Yeah. 100%. I mean, I believe that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right, man. Well, I think I think this has been awesome. I think anyone who listened could glean a ton from it in a variety of different topics. So really appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks.
That's a wrap on today's episode of The Burns Perspective. I hope you enjoyed it. Please check us out on our various social media channels and feel free to reach out with any questions or comments relating to today's episode.